I used to work the graveyard shift as a security guard at a small warehouse tucked in a dead part of town. It wasn't glamorous, hell, it wasn't even decent, but it paid better than most of the other crap jobs floating around. The place itself was nothing special. Dusty concrete, flickering lights, but they stored high-end tech, the kind of shit that gets stolen in seconds if left unchecked, so having eyes on it all night made sense. My job was glorified babysitting. Watch a bunch of grainy-ass cameras, do a couple of rounds, fill out the dumbest reports known to man. That night the storm was pummeling the roof like it had a goddamn vendetta. I usually liked those nights. Less people out, less bullshit. Just me, the cameras, and the rain keeping everything on mute. Got in around 10:30, saw the last shift workers clock out like they couldn't wait to run from the place. Then it was just me until 6 a.m. Same routine. Silence, distant creaks, rain hitting like a million tiny fists. After about 2 hours of staring blankly at the monitors, I dragged myself up for a routine sweep. Just walking through the warehouse, pretending I gave a damn. I reached the far end where the big racks of gear were, then headed back when a sharp beeping sound cut through the silence. The alarm. A sensor on the back door got tripped. My pulse didn't even spike. 99% of the time, it's the system being a dumbass. I pulled up the camera feed, saw nothing. Still, I had to check, so I trudged down the hallway, flashlight in hand, and cracked open the back door. Just an empty alley. Wet, quiet, void of life. The latch looked fine. No tampering, no scratches. I tested the sensor just to be sure. Still worked perfectly. I closed it up, locked it, but yeah, system flagged it, so that meant I had to file a damn incident report over nothing. Sat down to write it up, eyes barely holding open when something slammed in the distance. Not a small bump. A deep, bone-shaking thud. I froze, stared down the hallway like it was about to come alive. Took a second, then grabbed my flashlight again and started walking, listening. Nothing but rain tapping the roof like static. Made my way around, scanning the shelves for fallen boxes or some kind of explanation. Then I turned a corner and everything stopped. The front door was wide open, water pooling on the floor. Someone had been there. Someone was possibly still there. I bolted back to the security room and locked myself in like a coward, slammed the emergency button and waited for cops. While I sat there trying not to piss myself, more thuds echoed from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. Then nothing. Just dead silence until the sirens finally came. 2 officers swept the place while I gave the rundown. Barely a minute later, they dragged some guy out in cuffs. Greasy hair, dirty clothes, wide-eyed like a goddamn maniac. He was holding a hammer, just standing there in the dark, behind some boxes, clutching it like he'd been waiting. He looked right at me as they walked him past, cold, empty, like he didn't even see me, or worse, like he knew me. A few days later, we got word from the station. Dude was strung out on every drug in the book. Gave no reason for being there. Didn't even speak, mostly. Just stared into space like he was still in that warehouse. Nobody knows what he planned. Maybe robbery, maybe worse. Who brings a hammer and hides in the dark unless they're waiting for something? Someone. He's still locked up. I quit that job after. Couldn't handle the thought of another night there, especially when it rains. I still hate the sound of it. Makes me feel blind and deaf again. I'm a cop. Been doing this crap for years. Our shifts are a mess. 12 hours one week, 10 the next, flip-flopping between nights and mornings like someone's screwing with us. This particular night I was on a 10 p.m. to 10 a.m., already tired of everything before the call even came in. Teenagers trespassing on private property, big deal. Probably some stoned kids thinking they're edgy. The location? An abandoned hospital on the edge of town, boarded up for a decade, rotting away like a corpse no one bothered to bury. Everybody in the department had been there. My 4th time. Always the same. Kids laughing, spray painting dicks on walls, maybe trying to summon Satan for TikTok clout. I showed up expecting more of the same. But then I saw something weird. A flashlight darting across the second floor windows fast, like someone sprinting. Not walking, running. That got my attention. I got out of the cruiser, flashlight ready, hand near my holster. Called out as I entered, gave the usual warnings, nothing. Just silence and stale air. Always creeped me out, that place. The kind of quiet that feels like it's watching you. My heart was beating faster than I wanted to admit. I walked up the stairs, each step echoing like gunshots. Right as I reached the top, another loud thud, someone hitting a wall or door. I shined the flashlight down the hallway. Nothing. No shadows, no movement, just graffiti and old equipment collecting dust. I kept walking, checking each room, empty, until the last one. Door closed. I shouted again, no answer, kicked it open, no one, but something was off. There were cigarettes still smoking on the ground, fresh. Someone had just been there. But how the hell did they leave? Only way down was the stairs. I stood by the entire time. Unless they jumped 2 stories into the bushes, they were still on that floor. Then the door behind me slammed shut. Something crashed against it. Heavy. Footsteps pounding down the hallway. I shoved the door open with my shoulder, barely squeezing through. A goddamn hospital bed was jammed against it. I tore through the hall, but whoever was there was gone, just vanished. Backup arrived. We swept the place again. Nothing. Just eerie silence and cigarette smoke. Later that morning, 2 mothers filed reports. Both missing teenage sons. Both last seen near the hospital. Days passed, then weeks. No sign of them. No bodies. No witnesses, and still, 6 years later, nothing. And I keep thinking, if they didn't leave, where the hell did they go? Their disappearance is an unlikely one. And that's what makes it so difficult. It isn't certain whether or not the person in the hospital with me was one of the 2 kids, but the current most stable theory is that it was someone else. And unless something more comes up, it's not likely that we will ever know. It was a snowy night when I pulled into the parking lot of my gas station. I worked the overnight 11 to 7 shift and had been at the job for several months. Before this, I really didn't like this job, but finding somewhere else to work was really difficult, and due to how some things were in other aspects of my life, night shifts were the best for my personal schedule. Still though, I went in tired every night and struggled to get through every shift. I parked in front of the building beside the only other car in the parking lot, which was my coworker's. Then I went inside and relieved him of his shift. He left a couple minutes later, and then it was just me for the rest of the night. My manager had a paper on the desk with some things to get done, but from reading it over, it wasn't all that much. My guess was that it would take no more than an hour total to complete all the tasks, so I tried to put it off as long as possible to save me from falling asleep. Once I started getting really tired, but as I sat there behind the desk and somewhere around 12 a.m. a car pulled into the station, I glanced out the window, seeing an old SUV parked by one of the pumps. Of course, with it snowing outside, most people were not driving around, but getting a customer every once in a while was normal. I went back to my phone and scrolled through some videos, not paying much attention for probably 10 minutes until I looked back outside and saw the SUV was still there by the pump. The headlights were off and the doors were closed, looking like they should be pumping gas, but had been so long. I stood up and got closer to the window, looking down both sides of the building, but nobody was anywhere outside. If they had been in their car for the past 10 minutes with it off, they'd have to be freezing. It was snowy, windy, and cold, so I honestly got a little nervous for them. I paid more attention for the next few minutes, waiting to see any movement through the dark windows or for someone to get back inside their car. But there was nothing. It was like the car was just abandoned right next to the pump. After some thought, I put on my jacket and went outside. Immediately, I knew I was right. It was way too cold for anyone to be in there with the car off, or for anyone to even be outside for more than a few minutes. I rushed over to the car and looked around, then put my face close to the window and tried to look inside. Hello? Anyone in there? Just checking to see if you're okay. I called out, but from what I could see, there wasn't anyone inside. It wasn't exactly easy to see, so someone could have been. But I was pretty sure there wasn't, now even more confused. I backed up and looked around at the empty gas station parking lot before starting to walk back. Now, with my eyes not focused on the car, I was just looking at the ground and noticed shoe prints in the snow. Going toward the building, not really the front of the building, but kind of off to the side. I looked back and saw that they seemed to come from the car, but at this point that was freezing and didn't want to investigate further without warming up a bit. First read inside and turned on the small heater next to the counter, putting my hands in front of it to warm them up. I was only inside for 30 seconds to a minute, though, before a thump resonated through the building from behind me. I spun around, not seeing anything, then walked around the counter and toward the back. On the floor, there were puddles of dirty water like snow that had melted off someone's boots, feeling a chill run through me. I stepped closer to the back room and turned the corner toward where the supply room was. Standing in the dark behind one of the shelves, I could see the outline of a figure. They were tall with broad shoulders and had a large, scruffy beard, and they were looking right at me. My heart stopped for a moment, but after the initial shock, my reaction was to just walk back to the counter. I don't know why. Maybe I was just too shocked to react appropriately. After staring at the doorway to the supply room for, I don't even know how long, I quietly picked up the store phone and called the police, whispering for help. Then I endured the most unnerving 10 minutes of my life as I waited. During this time, I didn't hear or see anything from the supply room, which honestly added to my fear. For some reason, the man never came out to confront me. When 2 cops finally pulled in and came inside, I quietly told them where the man was. They searched the room while I stayed by the front, but I was shocked when they came out with nobody else. The man was gone. Watery shoe prints surrounded the back door, but outside were fresh tracks in the snow going straight away from the gas station, straight into the completely dark, empty field that led on for miles. Obviously, nobody could search that at night, but even when they did in the following days, they didn't find anything. I mean, the field was huge. He could have gone anywhere, but it was so cold and windy that night that I was almost sure that they'd find a body. The SUV was taken in for hopefully more information. I don't know how or why, but for some reason they couldn't find any history of ownership. So that left us with just what we know from that night. And we are still left with just that. Who the man was and what he was doing remains unsolved, and where he is now is just as much of a question. I picked up my first job this year as a delivery driver for Pizza Hut. I'm 16, so this was only a part-time job that I did after school a couple days a week. I chose Pizza Hut though because it's not that busy nowadays and I didn't want to have a job. I was stressing out all the time at the first months passed with nothing of interest. It was a very boring and repetitive job that left most days as forgettable. But then I had one experience that I'll never forget. It was a Friday, and we got an order in just before closing. The address wasn't too far, but it went through a part of town that I almost never went to. This neighborhood was different from the rest, not having tons of houses or stores in it, which gave me no reason to ever go there while driving through. I kept checking the GPS as it took me all the way through the neighborhood, turning down seemingly every road until it finally said I arrived. But something was off. On my left was a row of maybe 6 or 7 houses, and on the right was a path leading to a park. The waypoint on the GPS was showing up on the right side, so I double-checked by searching the address on Google, and it was the actual address of the park. I parked on the side of the road and picked up the pizza, getting out and walking up to the path. With a better look, I could see that it was just a walking path, not leading to any sort of playground or anything, which is where I expected to see a group of kids that had ordered a pizza. But instead, there was a guy sitting on a bench a little ways down, waving at me. I started walking over, still a bit unsure about it. As I got closer, he stood up and started sifting through his wallet for cash. The fact that he was alone on a walking path at night and for some reason needed a pizza delivered here was odd, to say the least. So I was skeptical. When I went up and greeted him, we began exchanging everything. But during the interaction, the guy started talking to himself, repeating the same phrases like, "I'm okay and everything's going to be okay," which made me feel like I kind of needed to ask him if he was okay. He stopped talking and looked up at me in his eyes. I saw fear and helplessness, something that I don't think I'd ever truly seen in someone's look before. From his look alone, a surge of adrenaline rushed through me, and I turned around only to be met by a tall man wearing a cloth mask over his face. He held me at knife point and screamed at me to empty my pockets and toss everything on the ground. I quickly did, as he said, and only became more terrified when he started to forcefully push both me and the guy from the bench off the path and into the woods, leaving everything on the ground and showing no interest in any of it. We walked for a few minutes, going well into the woods, far enough to no longer see the light of the path. Then the guy next to me suddenly shoved me to the ground and started to run in the other direction. The man in the mask surprisingly left me alone and took off after him. I quickly got back up and ran back to the path, hearing and seeing nothing else. Police arrived only a few minutes after I called, but both men were gone, and from what I know, they still are. I can't say why the other victim pushed me down, though it was most likely an effort to leave me behind so he could escape. I don't blame him, but it was a low move. It makes me feel slightly less sorry for him and whatever he had to endure afterward. What the abductor intended to do is unknown, but him showing no interest in my wallet or belongings makes me feel it was something extremely awful. Ironically, though, it was the selfishness of the other victim that both put me in that awful situation and saved me from it. I was driving a long route to deliver the last pizza for the night. It was well into the early morning hours, sometime around 2 a.m. I live in a pretty small town working for a local pizza shop. That was one of the only places offering delivery. Given that most of the town is spread far out, the road I was on was a not so often used side road that conveniently went from one side of the town to the other without any stoplights or intersections. It was mainly empty, going through the forest that surrounded our town. As I drove along, something with my car started to feel different. I checked my gas, but it was at half, and no other icons were showing up on my dashboard. I figured it was nothing and ignored it, but the further down the road I got, the more my car began to struggle. It was bumpy, shifting back and forth as I tried to maintain speed until it just stopped accelerating. The car rolled forward and I slowly turned it off to the side of the road, stopping it halfway in the grass with some annoyance. I looked again at my dashboard as I tried to turn the car back on, but had no luck. I rubbed my eyes with frustration, then calmly got out and looked for any signs of damage. On the outside of the car, I didn't see anything, but it was a really old car, and honestly, I didn't even know what to look for as I was out there. I looked down the road, not seeing anything but fog and trees. But when I looked back the way I came from, I saw a figure far out standing in the fog on the other side of the road. I got back in my car and called up one of my co-workers, who was also a friend of mine, and asked if he could do me a favor and pick me up. He agreed, though it wouldn't be for another 30 minutes. I thanked him, then called the customer to let them know my situation and apologized for the inconvenience. They were nice about it, so all I was left to do was sit back and wait. After a second, I remembered that figure that I'd seen, so I checked my mirrors but saw nothing. I didn't see anybody on the side of the road or by the trees, although it was really dark and foggy. I sat back again and opened the box of pizza, grabbing a slice for myself while I waited. Over time, though, an eerie feeling continued to grow on me. Being out on this empty road with very limited vision just started to freak me out. I could only see a few feet into the forest before it was complete darkness, and the fog on the road seemed to only get more dense as time went on. I waited for 30 minutes, keeping my eyes open the whole time and checking the mirrors, but then I heard something. Footsteps getting more noticeable as the sound came closer. Coming from the darkness within the forest, I stared at the empty fog, seeing a man appear near one of the trees. He walked directly up to my car, knocking on the window and sending a friendly smile at me. Sorry, I can't roll the window down," I said through the glass, not really sure what else to say. The man said nothing, but then casually tried to open the door before walking around to the back. I looked in the mirror as he stood by the trunk, seeming like he was trying to hide for a second. As he shifted around with something in his hands, and it was just then that headlights came through the fog from down the road. The man watched as the car slowed down and started to pull in behind me. Then he ran into the forest, losing my sight in the fog. My friend seemed to have noticed the man as well, because he was very cautious about approaching my car. We ended up leaving my car behind, and it was on the ride back with my friend that he told me the man was holding a gun before he ran into the forest. We called the police and had a tow truck pick up the car, which happened to have been broken into and looted. It turned out that the gas meter was stuck in the middle, and it was actually an empty tank. But concerning the man, there's been nothing on it. I don't know what he was trying to do. I mean, he obviously robbed the car, but what would he have done to me if he had tried to while I was inside, and why was he out there on that empty road in the middle of the night? Anyway, all I can say is that if my friend hadn't shown up when he did, I'm pretty sure I would have never been seen again. Being a delivery driver was never my first choice for a gig in my late 20s, but I got laid off during COVID, and the only place hiring was a local pizza shop. It was a popular place in our town, but really it was just basic pizza. Anyway, this was during the time when everyone was staying inside and ordering for delivery, so I was working overtime and staying busy up until close every night at 1 a.m. This was just another day running deliveries all over town. Around 12, we got a call in for 4 large pizzas for a house located just outside of town, about 30 minutes away. I accepted it knowing it would be my last order anyway, and it was a big order, so the payment would likely make up for the longer drive. By 12:15, I got en route to the house. The drive wasn't anything to note. All the roads were empty and nobody was outside due to the mandatory lockdowns going on. When I got to the address, though, I was immediately confused. There was a driveway with a large open gate looking like it belonged to a large mansion of some kind, but at the end of the driveway was nothing. It was just a dead end with forest all around, except not far off in the trees was a glowing light. I pulled in and parked in the middle of the driveway and got out. Now standing outside, I could see more clearly that it was a campfire or bonfire of some kind, and I could hear a group of people talking. After a moment, a figure stepped in front of the glowing light from the fire and waved at me like he was inviting me to bring over the pizzas. It goes without saying that this was not normal in any way, but seeing them wave me over and hearing the group of people gave me more than enough reason to believe it was just a bunch of college kids hanging out. I mean, they did order 4 large pizzas, so it all just added up in my head. I got the pizzas from the back seat and left the headlights on as I started walking off the driveway and into the trees. A few more people showed up in the light as I got closer, all watching me walk toward them. When I reached the bonfire, there was half a dozen more people standing and sitting in the area. Strangely, none of them seemed happy that the pizza was here and there was nothing else around in the yard. No beer bottles or drinks of any kind. No music players, no games, just a bunch of people hanging around. The bonfire. I stood on the edge of the site and kind of just held the pizzas up awkwardly, hoping one of them would come up to take them and pay a second. Later, a man walked over and took the boxes, handing them off to someone else. The whole eerie feeling of this place was getting to me, making me more uncomfortable with every second that passed before I could even ask for payment. Before I could even ask for payment, though, I heard some footsteps approaching and from the forest. Several more people came in toward the bonfire. There were at least a dozen of them now, all looking at me and not saying anything. I'd never once left without payment, but this situation literally had me shaking. I quickly turned around and started walking back to my car. I looked back a couple times, seeing them still standing by the fire and not hearing any of them speaking. As I exited the tree line, though, my heart almost stopped as two figures sprinted away from behind my car. They went straight into the forest and disappeared past the headlights. I didn't even check my car for anything missing. I just got in and backed out, speeding down the road to get as far from there as possible. Once I made it back to the shop, I told my manager of the strange situation. Thankfully, he understood and even tried calling the number. They used to place the order, but they declined to answer. After a bit of discussion, I ended up calling the police to have them check up on the group's suspicious behavior. It had been less than an hour since I was there, but when the police arrived, the only sign of them was the bonfire, still burning but left unattended. What really happened that night is unknown, and as far as I can see, it will likely remain that way. I worked at a retail store in my 20s as an overnight lead. It wasn't one of your regular big chain grocery stores. It was a local place with only about 8 or 9 locations. Most nights I'd have an overnight stalker to help out, but it wasn't uncommon for me to spend the whole shift alone. Again, not the biggest store, so it really wasn't a very intense working environment. A lot of the time I'd find myself working slow just so I wouldn't run out of things to do. This was one of those nights where I was alone and working at a steady pace. At the beginning of my shift, I loaded up some boxes and moved into the aisles to start stocking. It doesn't take much mental effort, so my mind was elsewhere and just thinking about random things, not really paying any attention. I went through about 3 aisles until a knock at the front entrance made me jump. I almost didn't even realize what it was because I was so spaced out. But once I did, I got really confused. I heard them knock again loud enough to echo through the store. I walked down to the end of the aisle and looked through the large front windows, seeing a man in the hood standing at the doors. I went up to the other side. "We're closed, won't be open until 8 a.m., I said through the glass. The man looked at me but didn't say anything. I pointed at the sign on the door. "We're closed, sorry," I repeated. The man continued to look at me for a few seconds, then turned and walked away. I watched him walk until I couldn't see him anymore, but it didn't look like he had parked anywhere. The whole thing was odd, to say the least, but I figured he was just at the wrong place or something. I went back to what I was doing, stocking up the shelves and eventually forgetting about the man. By 2 a.m. I'd gotten through half of the aisles and was ready to take my lunch break. I left the boxes where they were and went to the break room on the other end of the building. I was in there for probably a good half hour before I tossed the rest of my lunch and went back to work. I walked through the store and to the end of the aisle I was working on, but just as I looked up, there was a man walking past the other end. He looked like he was just walking across the store, not having noticed me. I froze in place, feeling that instant rush of fear. Now, listening intently, I could hear the man's footsteps move toward the side of the building I'd just come from. So I moved into the aisle and hid behind the shelves. The footsteps sounded like they went toward the break room, but just before I left the aisle to try and run and get help, I heard the man rushing out of the room. The footsteps were now sprinting through the store, getting closer and closer. I ran for the other end of the aisle. Looking back and seeing the man turn in and start running at me. I ran for the front door, getting my keys out and trying to unlock it with shaky hands. The man appeared at the end of the aisle just as I got it open, and just as I stepped out of the building, I saw a bright flash in the corner of my eye and heard a pop sound that made my ears ring, a gunshot so loud. I didn't even know where it landed, but I sprinted for my life around the building. I made it to my car and hid in the back seat as I called 911. From what I know, the man didn't follow me outside. He was gone by the time police made it to the store, but they found the back door to be busted open, along with some heavy tools sitting next to it. The most terrifying of their findings was the hole created by the gunshot sitting right to the side of the front doors. Why the man broke in and was so aggressive, targeting me like that, is unknown from his behavior. The police seemed to think it was some kind of mental breakdown or psychotic break, not having any real reason to target me specifically other than the fact that I was alone. I no longer work there, but I can tell you that for the years following that incident, I was on edge every single night. I work from home for a cybersecurity company, which really isn't as interesting as it might sound. I have to be online overnight from 10 to 6, scrolling through files full of code to see if anything is a possible threat. It's extremely boring, and when paired with the overnight shift, it makes for a struggle every night to stay awake. One night, just a few weeks ago, I was up at 2 a.m. working and feeling the weight of my eyes. I pushed through the sleepiness for a while, checking my phone over and over, hoping the time had somehow skipped forward at 2:40, though I took a break and decided to order some food to get myself some fuel for the remaining 3 hours of my shift. I opened up Uber Eats and my only real option was Taco Bell, so I sent in an order and got up to get something to drink. As I walked through the house with only the hallway light on, I woke up some more and realized it was raining outside. I looked out the front window and was surprised at how hard the rain was coming down, given I'd been so oblivious to it while working. My first thought was how I just ordered for delivery, and I felt really bad for basically making someone run through the rain for my own convenience. I checked my phone and saw the order was already received, so I sat on the couch and waited for them to show up. After about 10 minutes, I was notified that they had picked up the order, so I watched the map on Uber Eats as the car made their way across the town and eventually into my neighborhood. Once they were a minute away, I put my phone down and opened up the front door so we can make the exchange as quickly as possible. I stood at the open door, staring at the end of the road where they should have been coming from, but another 5 minutes went by without seeing any cars. I picked up my phone again and checked, but on the map, their car was still in my neighborhood, and when I zoomed in, I realized they were right around the corner just before the turn onto my street. I looked outside again, but didn't see any lights from their car. My rightful reaction was that they probably had the wrong house or couldn't see the address numbers through the rain, so I tried calling them a few rings, then they rejected it. I tried again, but had no luck, unsure of what exactly was going on. I stayed at the door and waited. I want to say 5 more minutes went by before I tried to contact them again. I called, and this time it rang for a while, but then they answered. I asked where they were and if they needed help finding my house, but as I listened for their response, all I heard from their side was the crackling sound of rain pouring down. After another few seconds, I hung up, feeling really weird about that call. I checked the map one more time. At first it hadn't updated, but when it did, it showed them right outside my house. I checked the windows and saw nothing, but knowing they were walking around in the rain like this was giving me a really bad gut feeling. I closed the door and locked it, and I swear I only made it a few steps down the hallway before a loud knock shook the front door. I carefully looked through the peephole. A man in a gray hoodie was pacing around on the porch. His head was on a swivel like he was checking for any onlookers. As he waited anxiously for me to answer Uber Eats delivery, he yelled, but nowhere did I see a bag with my food. I stayed in place, not answering or making any sounds. The man got increasingly more hectic with his movements. and called out several more times. Then he suddenly pressed himself up against the door, blocking my view as I heard a few dull scrapes on the wood before he quickly ran to the side of my house and disappeared in the rain. I called the cops, but his car was already gone, and from what I was told, he was using a scam account. A couple days went by with nothing else to report on until I noticed a small scratch on my front door. It was an X, but it didn't look like it was made for me to see. It was more hidden, like a personal indicator for something. It could have just been a fluke to scare me, but I still painted over it to conceal whatever that marking was supposed to mean. That night still leaves me with an uneasy feeling in my gut, especially since he had some sort of sharp object in his hand as he waited for me to open the door. Part of me is still convinced that that won't be my last encounter with him. In my mid-20s, I worked at a retail store as the overnight manager. It wasn't a big place, and the only reason I was technically a manager was because I'd be the only overnight worker, so I was in charge of checking stock, filling shelves, and sometimes receiving order shipments. I was very satisfied with the job and never found myself hating the work, and up until this, I hadn't had anything really happen. It was a weekday night and a storm was just setting in as I started my shift. Over the first hour of being there, the rain had picked up and the wind was hitting the building much harder than before, making a lot of noise. I was filling the shelves for the first 2 hours, trying to get the time-consuming tasks out of the way first. As I was in the aisle, though, I heard a thud sound resonating through the building. It sounded like it came from the back of the store in the warehouse section where our delivery bay was. I walked over and saw the solid metal back door that truck drivers used to get in when making deliveries. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that the thud sounded like a bang at this door, as if a driver was trying to make a delivery but there were none scheduled for tonight. I opened the door and was met with a face full of cold rain and wind. I stuck my head out briefly to look down at the shipping bay and saw no trucks, so I closed the door and dried off while walking back to the aisle. I assumed the noise was just the building, having shifted a bit from the wind, or maybe just some strange sounding thunder that I hadn't noticed before. I continued working for another full hour before taking a lunch break in the back office, spending maybe 15 minutes there before heading back. But while I was walking through the store, I got this strange feeling like everything had gone silent, aside from the rain ticking on the roof. It gave me chills, and as I reached the end of the aisle, I saw something that made my heart almost stop right next to my cart. Halfway down was a line of wet shoe prints through the aisle. I approached it without even thinking and tried to figure out how this was even possible. I followed them down to the front of the store until I saw so many watery prints going all over that it was impossible to follow, and honestly horrifying to know that they'd walked around the entire place. I ran back to the office and locked myself inside, calling the police and waiting. As I sat there, I only got more scared as I couldn't see outside the office door, and the rain pouring on the building was too loud for me to hear anything else. After 10 minutes, the operator that had me on hold came back on the phone and said the police were right outside the building. I quickly got up and opened the door, and right on the ground was another set of watery shoe prints alongside mine, leading right up to the office I was in. I sprinted to the front and hurried to let the police in their search. They didn't find anyone in the store. Security tapes were reviewed not long after showing us a man in a dark jacket entering the building through a side door that had been left unlocked. He clearly spotted me early on and stayed hidden until I went on break. Then he walked around aimlessly. He didn't steal or break anything. He just went down the aisles and looked at the shelves. But the creepiest and most horrifying part was when I entered the office and waited for the police. The man came up to and stood outside the office door waiting for several minutes as he stared at the doorknob, like he was preparing for me to come out. Luckily, he decided to walk away a few minutes later and exited the store. No more footage of him was seen. After that, the man never came back, and as far as I was told, he was never found. What he was doing that night is still uncertain, and it will likely remain as an eerie uncertainty for the rest of my life. This happened last fall. It was toward the end of the season, closer to winter, and where I live, it gets pretty cold and even snows sometimes in October. I've been doing food delivery for the past 3 years and was working on this night. It was around 10 p.m. and lightly snowing outside. It was one of the first snowfalls, so people must have been skittish to go out. I was one of few cars driving around, but a lot of orders were coming in. Pretty much as soon as I'd finished one, another one would pop up. After driving around everywhere until almost 1 a.m., I took up one last order. The snow was starting to pick up and I was just getting a little tired. I drove through the McDonald's that they'd ordered from and picked up the food, then set in the directions to the house. It was close, about 10 minutes away, but I didn't consider the direction it was in before accepting the order. It was opposite from where I lived, and I was already a good 25 minutes from home, so it was going to be a long drive home afterward. Annoyed at myself, I turned out of the parking lot and onto the road. The plow trucks still weren't out yet, probably because they weren't expecting this much downfall, but my SUV was usually good in the snow, so I wasn't that nervous. While I was driving, I noticed the road I was heading down was about to leave the main area of town. I checked the map again and it said it was this way, but it was just a very unusual route. I didn't even know any houses were down there because the only reason people take the road is to get to the highway that leads out of state. I went down for a few minutes, seeing only street lights and trees until I came up to the turn. It was a single small street leading off the road. I slowed down, being more careful since this street was smaller and had trees lined up right beside it. So sliding off would make a really terrible night. As I made my way down, I saw a few long driveways leading to faint lights in the trees far out. Before I reached the driveway I was to turn down, it looked like all the others. I slowly drove through the driveway until I made it to the house. It was medium-sized and older, completely covered in snow. Nothing looked too notable about it, really. The only interesting thing was that it was out here in the middle of some forest. I parked out front and got the bag, then started walking up to the door. The snow was thicker than I would have liked, soaking my shoes and even the lower legs of my pants. When I got up to the porch, I knocked and started to set the bag down, but almost immediately the door swung open. I looked up, seeing a large man in a winter jacket. His face was pale, like he'd just been outside in the cold. "I got your order right here," I said, holding the bag up. After a moment, the man stepped back and opened the door wider. You can see. It's back and open the door wider. You can set it down right over there." He lifted his arm and pointed toward what I assumed was the kitchen. The way he said it made me feel like I had to, but I knew it was a horrible idea to go in there. I looked at the man's hands, seeing he wasn't holding anything, so it really didn't make any sense for me to do anything other than hand him the bag. "Sorry, but I really have to get going," I said nervously, holding the bag up again. The man's face dropped into a frown. Then he suddenly slammed the door shut, still holding the bag up and just a bit shocked by what was happening. I set it down on the porch and quickly started walking back to my car. But just as I got past the front yard, I heard something from behind me. I turned around, realizing it was from somewhere on the other side of the house. It could have been a back door or something, but was too muffled to hear clearly, getting creeped out. I walked quicker and got in my car. I switched it on, and right as I looked up, I saw the man coming around the side of his house and making his way quickly over to my car. He had something in his hands. It almost looked like rope, but there was something else that I wasn't able to make out. I suddenly felt my heartbeat spike and adrenaline take over my body. I started going in reverse, trying my hardest to go quick, while also not getting stuck in the snow. The man got close, probably just a few feet away, before my car was able to grip the road and start picking up some speed. I backed up through the whole driveway, seeing the man eventually stop and watch, slowly fading into the dark as I backed up into the street. I don't know what he was doing. Honestly, the whole thing was just terrifying and confusing enough to make me not even want to think about it. I still do food deliveries, but I'm far more cautious, and most of the time I don't even knock on the doors anymore. I just drop the food on the porch and leave. Had I stayed any longer that night or had entered the house, who knows what would have happened to me. I work at a 24-hour drive-through restaurant, and this had happened only a few weeks ago. I'm a crew manager, but for the most part I just do the same things everyone else does, which is cook and take orders. For overnight hours, we always have at least two people, one being a manager and the other usually being a cook. On this night, the cook had called in sick, and when I called the others to see if they could cover his shift, none of them said they could. So by 12 a.m. I was the only worker there. Now usually the restaurant doesn't get busy overnight and more employees come in at 4 a.m. So it wasn't an entire shift alone, but it still meant that for 4 hours I had to do everything myself. I left my headset on in case someone came to the drive-thru, then started working on the tasks I had for the night. I started by scraping and cleaning the stovetops. But a few minutes in, I was interrupted by a banging sound from the front of the restaurant. I walked down and looked over the counter, seeing a man standing at the front door and banging on it. Then he pressed his face against the glass and looked inside, scanning the whole room before his eyes sat on me. I walked over to the door as he stared at me, and when I got closer, he backed up and waited like he thought I was going to open it. I yelled through the glass that our dine-in area was closed and that he needed to use the drive-thru. If he wanted to order something, he looked confused, so I yelled again that the doors were locked and he had to use the drive-thru. He showed no response that time, not giving me any idea whether he understood me or not, so I just turned around and walked back to the kitchen. I figured he'd have to get the hint at some point that the doors weren't opening. I continued working on the stovetops, spending at least 15 to 20 minutes on them. Throughout this time, I had gone once to check the front to see if the man had left, and from what I could see, he was gone. The whole parking lot was empty and the man was not at the door. But it was a couple minutes after finishing with the stoves that I got an alert from my headset that someone was in the drive-thru. I turned on my mic and asked for their order while walking to the window, but nobody said anything. When I got to the window, I immediately saw in the camera that there wasn't a car out there. I looked around the screen and didn't see any movement either, so I ignored it and started walking back. But as I got to the back room, I slowed to a stop when I thought I heard something. I stood in place and listened as footsteps slowly walked above me on the roof of the building. They were careful steps, not making much sound aside from the roof creaking, but I had no doubt that there was someone up there. I followed the sound of their steps with my stare moving down the ceiling until I saw the ladder leading to the maintenance hatch, and that's when I realized what they were doing. I sprinted over to the ladder and started looking for some sort of lock to keep the hatch from opening. But I'd never even used it, so I had no clue how it worked or if it even locked. Then there was a loud creak from the ceiling directly above me, and a few thuds came from the outside of the hatch. A moment passed, then the hatch creaked, opened slightly, and through the small gap, all I saw were a set of eyes staring back at me. I sprinted for the front of the building, hearing loud thuds from where the hatch was as I quickly unlocked the door and ran for my car. I called the police as I sat inside and frantically looked through the windows of the restaurant. While on the phone, I saw a shadow moving by the front counter. Then a man appeared standing in the far back of the restaurant, but was looking in my direction. After a moment, he turned and disappeared behind the kitchen, leaving me in a panic until the police made it. They searched inside and outside, going on the roof as well, but the man had already run off. Nothing from the place was missing either. No equipment or money was taken, nothing. He just broke in and left. I tried to not think about it too much, but it's hard not to come to the conclusion that he was there for me. Like I said, this happened pretty recently, so there's still not much of an update on it. Even with his face on the cameras, there's yet to be a confirmed identity. The owner of the building added a padlock to the inside of the hatch though, which should have been done before, but I guess it was just an inconvenience. I still worry about the man's intentions and if he could be watching for me to be alone again, waiting to do whatever it was he tried before. I spend a lot of my spare nights doing deliveries for DoorDash. It's my way of getting extra money while also not needing to commit to a more strict second job. I started driving around 9 p.m. on this night and steadily took on some orders until 11, where it slowed down a bit. During this time, I just drove around the shopping center that had most of the fast food restaurants people often ordered from, and eventually another order came through. It was a regular order to be delivered about 4 miles away. After getting the food, I started the directions to the address, and it was almost immediately apparent that it wasn't a house. I scrolled in on the map, which only showed streets and buildings, and the address it pointed to was along a street that had no buildings on it. It looked kind of like an empty plot of land, but the DoorDash map was never that great. So I just started driving and decided to at least check it out and maybe call the customer if there was an issue. I drove out, taking just under 20 minutes until I reached the street. It was on this street, was very bare, no houses or crossroads and no cars driving on it. When I got to the end, it became a gravel road, and on the side was a small wooden sign that was too weathered to be legible. I pulled onto the gravel and turned my brights on, and right away I could see something far off down the road. I drove in closer, and as I approached it, my phone dinged to let me know that I'd arrived, and my headlights was a small mobile home or some kind of RV, and on the door were poorly painted numbers. I looked back at my phone, 2760. It was the address I got out, holding the food in my hand as I walked up to the RV, getting closer. It was a bit unsettling to look at. It was overgrown. Closer. It was a bit unsettling to look at. It was overgrown and old, which was strange considering it was a mobile home, meant to be moving around. I gave it a knock and waited. This was a rare cash order, which made more sense once I saw the place, but it definitely didn't make me feel good having to stand here as I looked around. An eerie feeling loomed over me. This place was surrounded by the woods with no lights anywhere past the RV. It was complete darkness. I heard something from inside and I prepared for them to open the door, but then a voice to my right startled me. I looked over and saw a man smiling at me standing by the corner of the RV. He asked if I had his order and I nodded, apologizing and walking it over to him. I handed it off and said his total. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, then smiled again and said he just needed to grab the rest. He turned and walked back around the RV while I stayed where I was. This whole interaction in writing doesn't seem as off as it was in person, but I can tell you there was something very wrong about this guy. It was just something about the way he acted and said everything that gave me chills. I waited for a minute or so before getting more nervous and looking around the corner to see where he went. In the distance, I saw a figure standing by what looked like the dark outline of a shed. They were not walking. They were just standing there. As the fear grew inside me, my head jolted around, hearing the door to the RV opening. A different man looked out at me, and just as I started to greet him, he slammed the door shut, my heartbeat now intensifying. I looked back out at the man who was by the shed. He was now walking back toward the RV, but had something else in his hands in the moment. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it was either a long bat or a rifle. I ran back to the car, getting in and turning it on with shaky hands. As I put it in reverse, the man came around the side of the mobile home and stood calmly in the darkness as I drove off. I don't know what happened there, but I wasn't exactly keen on finding out. I went straight home afterwards and debated calling 911, but was caught up on the fact that I didn't actually know what was going on. In the end, I made the regretful decision not to notify the police. Whatever happened that night will remain as just the strange encounter. It was with no answers to the true nature of it. I was driving through my city delivering for Postmates way back in the day when it had basically just started. Every order was mostly inside the main city blocks, but I had just gotten an order from outside the main roads. I picked up the food and headed over, but the further out I got from the city, the more the roads became less populated, both of cars and of houses. Everything was replaced by the woods. I had been out this way before, but only when leaving town. I didn't even know there were houses out here. I drove until the GPS told me to turn down a gravel road, which was almost unnoticeable. There were no lights aside from the dim ones coming from my old car. As I made my way down this thin path through the woods, it was much longer than I expected, taking a whole minute to reach the house. To be honest, it was what I assumed it would look like due to its isolated location in the woods. It was aged and almost entirely made of wood, having vines growing up the outside of the house. There were a few lights on inside shining through the windows, but if there hadn't been, then I probably would have thought twice about approaching it. I checked the bag for everything, then went up to the front door. I pressed the doorbell, which didn't really work, so I had to knock as well. As soon as my hand hit the door, though, it creaked open cautiously. I opened it a little further and called out, "I have an order here from Postmates." A moment later, I called out again, "Anybody home?" There were no sounds coming from inside, but all of the lights I could see were on, and through the crack in the doorway, I could see a TV in the living room. It was playing, but was muted. I don't know how else to really explain my thoughts, but the vibes were just off, and I knew something was wrong about this. I turned and went back to my car, getting in and starting to do a U-turn right away. I felt a problem. The steering was stiff and my car was struggling to move through the gravel, feeling extremely bumpy and jittery. I got out and my face went cold. When I saw that my front tire was flat, I then moved my eyes over to the other tires, and every one of them was flat as well. Not just a little deflated, but completely flattened. My stomach dropped instantly, knowing this was a purposeful act. In that moment, my mind was everywhere. What terrified me was that I didn't know whether someone put something on the path or if someone had come up while I was at the house and done it behind my back. Either way, the only thing I knew was that someone was out here with me, way out in the woods in the middle of nowhere. I got back inside my car and locked the doors, trying to call 911, but had no connection. As I ran through my few options, I saw a light in the house flicker, and the front door opened wider, revealing a man in the doorway. Without any hesitation, he started walking quickly over to my car. I didn't second guess myself. This time, putting it in drive and forcing my car through the gravel in the mirror, I saw the man stop and stare at my car. Once I was on the main road, I took it more carefully, driving slow to keep from damaging my car until I got enough signal to call 911. But what unfolded afterwards was equally as terrifying. That house was owned and lived in by a single mother with 2 kids, all of which said they were at the house sleeping in their rooms. At the time I claimed this happened at, they never ordered anything or saw any man or even found anything missing in their home. I don't know if they were in on it somehow or if they were just as much a victim as I was. Why the man ordered food to the house and slashed my tires still doesn't make sense to me, though. The only thing I've thought of is that maybe he was planning to do something horrible to that family, and I was going to be set up somehow to take the fall for it due to my presence at the property. At the exact time it would have been committed. It may be a stretch, but if that's true, then me getting away, it might have saved more lives than just my own.